In 2025, I don't have a lot of time for what some people might call Twitter drama, which is largely why I haven't spoken about the constantly developing controversy in the niche, trans, and gender critical side of Twitter, the Pissed Off Lawyer. In the last year or so, an account called The Pissed Off Lawyer, a trans masculine lawyer who has worked for years in the queer community, announced she was detransitioning after being on testosterone and hormone treatments for many years. From people I had spoken to, she was a longtime queer activist who even offered free legal help for trans people looking to change their names legally for free. A member of the community who proudly advocated for progressive causes. So, what happened? Why does her feed now look like this? Soon after she announced her detransition, she received pushback from the trans community for simultaneously getting friendly with TERF and detrans accounts. Here, the story becomes a constant storm of backstabbing, accusations, outright lies, and blind social media backlash. I will be doing my best to sum up and get to the heart of the controversy because as I've followed and dug into it, what happened to the Pissed Off Lawyer isn't just an example of how predatory right-wing and reactionary movements like gender criticals are, but more simply a story about how social media is rotting all of our brains. For most of this video, I will be using her legal name Hendrix, which she still goes by, and as of recording, I have been able to confirm the pronouns she uses are she, her, which might seem like an odd thing to preface, but a large part of this story has to do with how public Hendrix has been with changing the direction she was heading in, leading to a place where it seems like nobody can trust her. There are probably plenty of people who have only heard bits and pieces about this story, but don't have the whole context, which is why I want to give as comprehensive of a look as possible. That doesn't mean I'm going to be going through every bit of drama and every account Hendrix has beef with, because honestly, it's just not important. For example, she's been attached to adjacent controversies like being in a Discord server with a trans man who joked about deceiving a TERF into having sex with him and then shared pictures of that person. But that's not important to bring up, except to say it's another in what will be a long line of questionable and outright bad associations for Hendrix. Again, I don't want to go into every side issue she's been associated with. I'm not looking to do a drama piece or a hit piece. What started as a journey of personal conflict for Hendrix, beginning the process of detransitioning, quickly became a case of being welcomed with open arms by TERFs, gender criticals, and other anti-trans activists on Twitter. And as more prominent trans and detrans accounts alike took notice, Hendrix became a kind of digital Thunderdome. It got to the point where she even had DM contact with J.K. Rowling herself, who reached out to Hendrix. In the DMs, which have now been leaked, Joanne has the tone of a disappointed mother welcoming a prodigal child, saying she never hated Hendrix and wants the best. J.K. Rowling would also comment on Hendrix's detransition announcement, saying, "Welcome home." I was sent a Medium post on this detransition announcement and subsequent reinforcement seen from gender critical and TERF spaces. In it, the writer also collects videos showing the extent of the effusive support seen, noting how similar it feels to the love bombing in Christian and radical faith circles. And this was roughly where I came into the picture. At the beginning of the year, I began in earnest a undercover project in the spirit of previous projects of mine, to find a way into detrans and gender critical spaces for myself. Part of that was doing a lot of research, and part of that research was interviewing people on both sides of the issue. I had interviewed Daisy Strongen, a detransitioner who was featured in PragerU's Detrans documentary. I also interviewed Eli Ehrlich, a prominent trans activist. And then I interviewed Hendrix. And so let's start with, for people who might not know, your history just in the broader LGBTQ movement.
So I first came out in like 1996. I was like 14. I came out as a lesbian. So I've been in the community. It'll be 30 years next year. And I started doing activist work at like 14, volunteering for like the Midwest AIDS Prevention Project and stuff like that. So I got into activism very, very young and did it. I mean, I've been a part of so many different organizations and programs for trans people and for the whole community, you know, not just for trans people. But like that's my history in a nutshell. It's just activism. And then when I became a lawyer, I do criminal defense, but I also did a lot of work with the community. Like I had a lot of trans clients, not just for name changes. Like it could be they were arrested or they lost their license or harassed by the police, anything like that. So up until the past 2 months, that's what I've been doing. About 6 months ago, which is kind of correlates with the well, whenever the election happened, I got really, really depressed. I think as a lot of trans people did, with what was coming. And mind you, again, I just want to, I've been through these things before. I did it as a gay person. I've been through political upheavals, things like that. But just like the thought of having to do it again, right? A second round of hate in my life for being trans, it just like made me really depressed. So then, he takes office and it just like was overwhelming. It literally was overwhelming in a way that I think, I've been through it as a gay person. I think, and you could say social media might exacerbate the hate, you know what I'm saying, towards trans people. But, I started to question, I think with everyone in my ears started to question whether I'm actually trans or not. And that's how it started.
You have now been accused of being a grifter, of, betraying the community, of all of these like pretty severe things. And I kind of want to get your just thoughts on that, how you feel about that. And we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, the whole grifting thing, kind of doesn't work for me because like I've never been motivated by money. So and then it could also be for attention. Grifting is can be for various amount of reasons. But I was like, well, I was already getting attention anyway, so it's not like I needed it any more attention than I was already getting. So I just, in terms of grifting accusations, like no, that's definitely not where I was going with that. I don't, and plus, like I'm not. Let's say after therapy, like I still like that's what I'm gonna do, right? I'm not suing my doctors. I'm not going to go be testifying in front of Congress about banning care. I have my opinions that might be a little different, I think, in the community, and that started coming out, and I think I felt kind of bottled up there, in terms of my like varying opinions on being trans that aren't in line with like the more far left ideas. But yeah, I just want to say, like, yeah, I'm not trying to grift off trans people. Like, I would not, I wouldn't be able to, like, look at myself in the mirror for that.
At the time, it was fascinating insight into someone who was fully aware, seemingly, of the role she played in the detrans movement. From what she described, she felt love bombed, even manipulated. The people it seems like you are interacting with more, talking to more, a lot of them being prominent detransitioners, detransition activists, people like J.K. Rowling. What was it like having a lot of those people kind of reach out to you, galvanize support around you? Have you formed any more relationships with them outside of social media?
It was weird. I'll tell you that because I've been fighting with them for years. Like TERFs, transphobes, anything anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, I've been fighting them. I think what happened is I got curious on having open dialogue because I have been on Twitter fighting, and it gets nasty. It just gets nasty. But I will say this: is for I'm only friends with like one person you could consider a TERF outside of social media, but I wouldn't consider any of like, oh my God, I'm best friends with everybody now. Because I'm not a TERF. Like I still fundamentally disagree with TERFism as an ideology. I think I need to probably make that clear. The J.K. Rowling thing, I'll touch on that because I know people want to know about that. Her and I last year had like a 6 month, I want to say, like exchange back and forth, not in DMs and like on comments, right, where I would challenge her beliefs and she would go back and forth. It was very cordial. Like she wasn't going to talk to me. I was going to go off on her. When I made the detransition post, nobody was more surprised than me that she unblocked me to comment. And I think it really threw me off. I'm not going to lie to you. When she said she wanted to DM me, I got curious and I said yes. In our DMs, I'm not going to divulge what was said verbatim because it was a private conversation, but it was not like we talked about anything trans. She was trying to give me advice about how to handle a giant backlash. It's essentially what was her aim. But don't get me wrong, I'm not stupid, so I know like there's got to be a motivation there to want to talk to me. When this all started, I kind of understood that trans people are going to think I'm going to be used as a gigantic weapon against them, given that I have visibility and um, my story can get out there. So I definitely I could empathize with that. Um, I do talk to other detransitioners. I don't necessarily share, well, I don't share a lot of their views. Like, for example, a lot of them feel medically harmed, but they were children. Like Prisha Mosley, for example, was a child when she transitioned. I was not. I was a full grown adult to a point where sometimes I'm sitting in spaces, and a lot of the criticisms of me is I'm in spaces with people that are unsavory. I don't do a lot of talking in those spaces. I do a lot of listening, and sometimes I do get uncomfortable with the things that are being said. Like I don't make a very good bigot. Let me just be honest with you.
But there was also a hesitancy to resist the gender critical side of things, partially because she had been so quickly and strongly vilified by trans people of all stripes on Twitter. Have you seen any support that is still coming from more progressive spaces, more support saying, hey, we still do support you, just, please don't use this as a cudgel to hurt us. Don't side with the TERFs. Don't do this. Have you seen any of that more metered kind of appreciation for the work that you've done previously?
I have seen it. It's just it got kind of buried by the negativity of people, like some like 1,000 people telling me to kill myself, or to. I had one person say retransition or kill yourself. Kind of got drowned out by that. But I do want to acknowledge the people that were supportive, and trans people. I still have trans friends, believe it or not. Um, yeah, some people were just like, if this is what you want to do, like it's fine. But they did. A lot of people would add the caveat, don't become the next Chloe Cole, or don't do that. Which I think by now, like I'm just not on that track.
What was most interesting to me in our conversation was the knowledge that time spent on Twitter in these vitriolic discussions weren't helpful or even all that cathartic for Hendrix. She had, by her own admission, been spiraling, dragged down further by lashing out at anyone who lashed out at her, in the process, just putting a bigger target on herself, and the cycle then becomes self sustaining. Would it be fair to say that when you received some of that pushback, that you kind of felt a need to double down, or you felt that you got maybe too defensive or anything like that?
I think what happened is because like I did kind of I will admit trans Twitter, and I want to be clear, trans Twitter, I don't mean all trans people. I just mean like, trans Twitter is a thing. Um Kind of dogpiled me, and in a dogpile, and I've been dogpiled by TERFs, I've been dogpiled online before, like I'm not saying one side does it or doesn't do it. Uh but I think that made me double down a little bit more versus like maybe had I had a little bit of space, I could have been like, yeah, maybe this wasn't the best thing to say, or yeah, like okay, like I'm not gonna go there. I think it just became a snowball of reactionary. And so yeah, I did get defensive at some points. But I was trending on Twitter for like 2 days, my first name, and it was insane. It was not a good experience.
And while some people would blame trans activists, I see that as a monolith that doesn't really exist. Not everyone who went after Hendrix even has similar beliefs about transness or identity, let alone politics. They were just united on this front by a perceived threat against the community, something even Hendrix understands.
I've been dealing with a lot of community, to give you a background, a lot of like trans Twitter community infighting for some months before all this happened. To where this person doesn't like this person, and then this person doesn't want to be in a space with this person, and this trans person doesn't like this, and like a lot of this infighting made me snap into like I just want to take a break from trans rights.
Well, and I think you said it earlier that trans people, we aren't a monolith, obviously, but I think there is this idea that I I kind of question even the veracity of that. There is a You see it a lot. Again, I hate to bring her up so much, but with people like Brianna Wu, where there is this one accepted dogma, and if you do not follow in lockstep with this radical leftist agenda, then you'll get kicked out or you'll get canceled. When really what I see, because it's, you know, like even, in talking in trans spaces, nobody agrees on everything. There are tons of
Yeah.
little disagreements. And so I think it's kind of silly to be like, oh, well, they agree on everything. And they like, if you say this one thing, you'll get canceled. Cause usually it's not that. Usually it is a little bit more complicated than that.
I think TRAs are often represented as like this kind of like mob mentality, right? Of people that want to destroy gender and sex. That's how I would say the other side sees it. And when you earlier brought up the different characterizations of trans women and trans men, I think trans women obviously get the brunt of the um, hate when it comes to TERFs. But I mean, I've gotten hate too, so I mean, like I can't say it. But the characterization of being like porn addled, this, and that, and then vulnerable women. But then they kind of see NATRA. Like I've been at. Let me on a side note, I've been asked to apologize to certain TERFs and to the other side for like attacking them when I was fighting with them. I'm gonna just say this for the record. That's never happening. I'm never going to apologize to a TERF in my life. I, they dox me. They put me on Kiwi Farms. Like, why would I apologize for that? For what? For defending myself? So, I was a TRA, um, but I think that with the infighting, it just turned me off to it. But also, I've been doing it for 30 years, so there's a lot of question of burnout there too.
For that reason, I don't really think we can say that trans people who in 2025 have been targeted and vilified more than ever before are to blame for having a strong reaction to what seems like a betrayal. And the longer Hendrix's saga went on, the more it seemed publicly like she was just going full on TERF. Social media is not a good outlet for personal conversation, which is a revelation, I'm sure. But it bears saying for this conversation. It's certainly not an outlet to facilitate healthy discussion and mutual understanding, and this shows that. It's so much easier to simply lash out and keep lashing out. The only way to win was really not to play.
Like I realized that I pissed off a lot of people. Um, and I don't hate trans people, like number one. I, I literally still live in a trans body and walk through life as a trans person functionally. So I would have to hate myself. Like I just don't. I just have different opinions. And I'm kind of at a point after 30 years of like reformulating those opinions and doing a lot. It's kind of like, and I'll just admit it straight up, like I said, an identity crisis that I need to work out in therapy versus taking it out on trans people. So I want to make it very clear, like I get it. I get the anger towards me with a little distance.
After our interview, I was somewhat hopeful that Hendrix would take the time she needed, self admittedly. Speaking personally, I saw someone grappling with cognitive dissonance, facing the idea that she felt she had spent a career working towards queer rights, and then when she did something the masses disagreed with, she was being tarred and feathered, but was also cognizant of the idea that the people embracing her might not be doing it out of genuine care or empathy. And being pulled in so many directions doesn't make for a more honest introspection on what she might actually want, removed from social pressures and perceived threats on both ends. I think after this, Hendrix tried to step away. And then came the twist of the knife. They took again to Twitter to claim that they had simply announced their detransition as an effort to go undercover in TERF spaces, and that several weeks of public harassment of trans people had all been an elaborate plan to gain the trust of gender criticals. The problem with this, immediately clocked by many of the counts who had been going back and forth with Hendrix for months, is that if this was true, there would be no need for the incessant and often bile-filled personal attacks lobbed at people. And yeah, honestly, if she had just made that announcement, if the undercover story was true, there would have been pushback. But if she had stuck with the story and actually had something to bring forward from her time in TERF spaces, hey, maybe people would have accepted this. But that wasn't the case. Too many things didn't add up, and it was very plainly just a lie attempting to save face, in the act, making the situation worse. This also caused a problem for me as someone who interviewed her. What avenue did I have to continue my undercover piece? Were these spaces on more alert now? Would me interviewing Hendrix add another layer to people's conspiracies about this? I didn't know. And honestly, it just raised too many questions, so I scrapped the whole piece outright. I had other things to work on anyway. Eventually, Hendrix would admit to the ruse, but the damage was done several times over. And going back through several months' worth of tweets, it became just another speed bump in a long and bumpy road. Much like she had felt pushed towards anti-trans and TERF spaces by the vitriol she had experienced from trans activists, when she tried in a last-ditch effort to regain some face by pretending it was all an elaborate operation, she was pushed back against even harder. Whatever feeling of solidarity Hendrix had with trans people and most queer people outside of these radical spaces had been shaken. And as the months went by, eventually she settled into a regular rhythm. She would post selfies and pictures, meeting up and hanging out with other gender-critical and TERF activists. She would repeat verbatim talking points from their circles. She would take part in their Twitter spaces and in the general activist sphere, and all along the way she would get in no shortage of unproductive fights on Twitter. Recently, when I saw Hendrix pop up on my timeline again and I looked through her tweets, I was shocked at just how vitriolic they had grown. When I had heard about the undercover op, I rolled my eyes and got back to work with my myriad other projects, but I was genuinely saddened seeing how far down this rabbit hole she had fallen, beckoned ever deeper by gender criticals. She defends her behavior as being an equal, opposite reaction to the criticism and insults lobbed at her by TRAs, a common abbreviation for trans rights activists in these gender critical circles. Now posting between two accounts, a lot of her social media bandwidth is taken up by firing back seemingly at anyone who insults Hendrix's appearance, her shifting attitudes towards trans people, her claiming to have gone undercover, and any other number of things. And she reacts in kind, posting unflattering pictures of people, calling them by publicly available dead names, quote tweeting them to be picked apart by her new and growing audience of gender criticals and reactionary detransition advocates. But much of her posting also goes beyond simply replying. Often she quote tweets seemingly random prominent trans accounts using selfies and side-by-side transition timelines to take trans women's happy moments or proud personal transformations and use them as bait for her audience to nip at. One of the things I did in preparation for an undercover look into detrans and gender critical spaces was to create a social media account and immerse myself in their narratives. If there was one thing I quickly learned, it was that there is no echo chamber on Twitter bigger than TERF-friendly and adjacent spaces. While trans people, particularly trans women, are often painted as an ideological monolith, the reality is that there are such wide swaths of ideological diversity. Prominent people have disputes all the time and long-standing grudges over sometimes seemingly minor disagreements. Trans girls can't even agree over their favorite GameCube game. You think that we have a united ideological front? The only underpinning uniting trans people in these online spaces to any actual extent is that they want to be able to live their lives happy and healthily without feeling discriminated against, without, for example, posting happy pictures that get them targeted for harassment by thousands of lonely British people. And even that standard of living happy and how it manifests is an incredibly disputed topic in trans spaces. Nobody goddamn agrees on if gender is important or should be abolished or what's the correct way to present or should someone DIY. And part of navigating the landscape of community is having these tough conversations and accepting we might not always come to a consensus, but at the end of the day, our core struggles are still the same. On the other hand, going into these reactionary and often right-wing leaning spaces with gender criticals is akin to turning your Twitter feed into a conveyor belt of noxious slop. I find it particularly interesting how, in these spaces, phrases are often repeated ad nauseum, if not word for word, then in spirit. Men can't have babies, no child is born in the wrong body, trans women are men, stay out of women's spaces. Despite the often copious amounts of research that at the very least proves conversations around gender and sexuality are much more complicated, the ideas are simplified here to push back against even that notion that there might be a bigger discussion to be had here. These ideas then become mantras, tenets, slogans. These spaces thrive on confirmation bias and groupthink. It actually reminds me quite a bit of the time I've spent studying both radical Christianity and white supremacy. Ideas are simply introduced to people and then reinforced, taken as truth. Every meme, every call-out post, every Twitter space is simply filled with people who aren't able to articulate their positions, often beyond something being simply self-evidently true, even if it's not self-evident to anyone outside of these echo chambers. I mean, look at these memes of unattractive men on Grindr with sissy fetishes. Obviously, that means all trans women look like this because autogynephilia. But then if you were to push back and say, well, no, this person probably doesn't even identify as a woman. Or if you say there are plenty of beautiful and passing trans women out there and show them a picture of somebody like Hunter Schafer, then they'll double down and suddenly you can tell everybody's birth gender by canthal tilt or whatever the fuck. And the goalpost will always move. Even when one of them is feeling down or conflicted or experiencing cognitive dissonance, the others will close ranks, repeating the mantras, encouraging them to go deeper, to push aside anything that might threaten that core ideology. In this case, hating trans people in general, and often women and trans femme people more specifically. This, by the way, is not how people operate in the real world. In the insulated online spaces where so much bile is festering and encouraged by social media algorithms and discourse, people might convince themselves that this is normal. But regardless of whether you think trans women shouldn't be in women's sports or if trans kids shouldn't get puberty blockers, most people would tell Graham Linehan, please get away from me, if he were to walk up to them and start showing the pictures on his phone, saying, do you see, like the end of Event Horizon. Browsing through Hendrix's timeline, it became clear that this is where Hendrix has settled for the time being. On the rare posts where she's not prostrating random accounts with TERF slogans, you can still even see detrans and reactionary activists simply reaffirming her. There's no friction to their acceptance of her, but there's also no depth or seemingly any genuine care either. I keep thinking of this one comment from Detrans Aqua for a post where Hendrix is ostensibly sharing a part of her personal journey, something she explains she's nervous about, and the response is just an impersonal slogan. And I can't help but think that the way she is responding and continuing to go about picking these fights has as much to do with her personal and detrans journey as it does how she's been accepted by these detrans reactionaries while being rejected by other queer and trans-affirming communities. It's a very telling divide between the more reactionary movements and trans and queer spaces, where trans people and their allies are undeniably distrusting and overprotective after the perceived betrayal by Hendrix, and didn't invite her back in with open arms when she lied and tried to spin a narrative. But not only did the gender-critical and reactionary feminists immediately invite her back in, but they continued to do so after Hendrix lied to them and then lied about going undercover. And I think this is something that even Hendrix is aware of. I can say that because we spoke about it just a few days ago, as of recording. So how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing, a lot of work. It's a very tumultuous time right now, so I have no shortage of things to cover. So tell me, I guess, about everything that's kind of transpired since we last talked. Because when we last spoke, if I'm remembering correctly, I haven't had time to go back and rewatch our interview yet. But if I'm remembering correctly, you had started to distance yourself after a lot of call out posts and beefing with people on Twitter. You had started to distance yourself from the more TERF, trans exclusionary, reactionary side of things. And then there was a period where I got, consumed with work. I didn't really pay attention to what was happening too much, but I kept seeing you. While we were both polite and Hendrix was very open in answering my questions, no matter how uncomfortable, the whole interview felt slightly different to me. There was this unplaceable air of unease, like at any point one of us, the trans YouTuber and the detrans activist, would be at each other's throats. There were other answers and questions about other controversies for those interested. I asked about some of the more Consistent subjects of her ire on Twitter, like Cecilia Bedelia, an account that had a long-standing beef with her.
Delia Bedelia. You know, it's interesting. I used to follow her and because of her endometriosis content, because I have endometriosis and I have a very long history with it. Um, and then when I came out as D-trans, I don't know what happened, but Celia starts posting about me first. Then I react. So we start going back and forth and back and forth. And essentially her claim is that I'm lying about, mind you, homegirls had one endo surgery. I've had like 12. Telling me I'm lying about my endometriosis story, about taking testosterone for endometriosis after my hysterectomy, and saying that I'm just making all this stuff up. And that's going to piss me off because I had to go through, I mean, I was disabled for like 6 years from the disease. I've been cut apart. I've went through it. So my fight with Celia Bedelia comes down to she just won't stop. So I have her blocked, to be honest, but people will send me things. So that's kind of how that got ugly.
After I put out a request for information to help me summarize the whole thing, somebody pointed me towards this account they believed to be run by Hendrix, parodying Cecilia. Now, the account does have a defensive streak when it comes specifically to Hendrix, so I just asked point blank. Another account that was I guess a parody account of Celia. I don't know if you've seen that.
Which one? I've seen a couple parody accounts of her.
Let me see. I have it here. Celia Bad Smell.
Yes.
They were alleging that you ran this account. Do you have any alternate accounts, parody accounts of other people?
I don't run that account. No, I have other accounts that are all like my original 2008 account, which I'm posting on now, and then like a crypto account from 2017, and then this account. I don't do parody accounts. I don't have time for that. I would admit it because that person makes me laugh because I don't like Celia, but it's not me.
And then there's an additional controversy involving the aforementioned trans man named Frankie and another trans man named Puck, where Hendrix had been found in Frankie's Discord laughing along to misogynist and frankly disgusting messages.
Well, Puck drags me into it because Puck infiltrated Frankie's Discord server, which I was in, and took a screenshot where Frankie had said that, well, I think Frankie's going by she now. She had sex with, as a trans man at the time, a TERF and spanked her, to which I laughed at. At the time, I was a TRA. I'm not going to get too far into it. I thought that was funny. That's all. I mean, we can pick apart my humor or not. But then I made that comment. I'm very random on Discord. I go away. And I guess Frankie had posted underneath a picture of the girl. Like, I never saw the picture. But everybody was like, "You're sharing revenge porn," and it like blew up. And people started. I found out because people started calling me a rape apologist and saying I was sharing revenge porn, Puck, and doing all this. So that's when I made the famous post dragging him and misgendering him once, and that's how this all kind of blew up. I'm no longer friends with Frankie. Puck. I wanted to sue for defamation, but I realized that would just be a waste of my time financially. So, but it did cost me things. I mean, that was the first allegation from the board when I got kicked off was that I engaged in revenge porn.
When I reached out to Puck personally for this piece, one difference in his story versus the one Hendrix told me was that Puck alleges Hendrix attempted to additionally dox him by alluding to a name and location. Puck told me this name wasn't accurate, but still a worrying escalation. From my time speaking with Puck, he mentions that this toxic person in these chats, Frankie, is someone who has a long history of lashing out and even doxed Puck in the past after being called out for preying on younger people and lying to have sex with people like TERFs. So I also asked Hendrix about any ties, and she informed me she does have Puck's info and got it from Frankie, but not to dox, but in the interest of pursuing defamation charges. For what it's worth in her correspondence, Hendrix also continued to misgender Puck, but also distanced themselves from Frankie, saying that Frankie was just in too much drama with a bunch of 20-somethings. Whatever the truth is, it is apparent that this is yet another intense spat fueled by animosity on both sides, with Hendrix escalating due to perceived personal attacks. Do I think it's the right move? Absolutely not. But at the same time, I see the logic behind someone seeing a threat to their livelihood and resorting to a nuclear option. But That doesn't generally make a situation better either. I did my best to get to the bottom of things I was curious about, like, for example, the lie about going undercover in TERF spaces. Your thought process of everything that happened as far as, talking about going undercover in TERF circles, getting pushback for that, and then all the way up to where we are now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when we spoke last. I think it was somewhere in July or August, if I remember,
That sounds right,
somewhere,
yeah.
yeah, a couple months ago. So, as far as, well, let's cover the PSYOP thing, because I know a lot of people are very lost on what happened there. And I mean, I don't expect everyone to follow every single development. So what happened is, in this, trigger warning for anyone listening, I was had a lot of suicidal ideation this summer, and I was essentially planning that. So I lied about the PSYOP. I did not infiltrate. I mean, I could have released everything that I had on them, but I that's not what I was aiming to do. So I had lied about that, and I was going to, well, I mean, I think the outcome of that is, and I was just going to leave it at that. That was my plan. So I went to Toronto in September, and I made the PSYOP post, and I spent like thousands of dollars. Like, I didn't think I was going to be here anymore. You know what I mean? So I went ham at Lady Gaga, and I went nuts, and but then I changed my mind. So now I have to kind of live with the consequences. And then I came out after that, and I just kind of admitted, no, I lied to everybody, and owned it, because there's just nothing I mean, I'm not going to double down and keep lying. I'm like, no, this is just a lie, everybody. So that's where we're at. Just to clear that up. I did in the process. I don't know if you're familiar with Ari, another detransitioner.
Yes, I was gonna ask about Ari as well, but continue. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, he was the one I kind of targeted in that, as far as like releasing anything, and I feel bad about that. Dragging people into it, and and even other trans people that I did lie to as well. So it just became a big disaster very quickly, on top of already of a disaster of a summer. Like, this is probably the worst 6 months I've ever had, and I'm 43, and I've had other bad times.
Where do you stand so people can kind of be clear on where you are, where you're at, as far as being trans, being detrans, siding with, TERFs against people like J.K. Rowling, with people like Ari? Like, where are you at this moment?
Well, yeah, that's a hard question. It's I'm a lot farther in a different direction than when we spoke in the summer, because in the summertime I was being pulled in like 70 different directions, right? From the trans side, from the TERF side, from this side, and it got really messy. Things became a lot clearer. I don't, how do I put this? I don't want to blame people for my own actions, but like, it's like a push and pull, right? So I have the trans community coming at me like this, then I'm coming at them like this, and it just becomes like this back and forth. But would I consider myself a TERF? I don't. I would consider myself more of a gender critical, and I know people think those two things are the same. The difference to me is the radical feminism, where I don't subscribe to that anymore. And I think they're too extreme anyway. I don't necessarily share the same opinions about adult care. My main thing is I don't agree with child transition, stuff of that along those lines. But I wouldn't put me like, oh, I'm like the next J.K. Rowling.
Depression and ideation are very serious issues, and I take them seriously even for somebody I don't agree with. Someone who has thrown hurt and harassment at people I'm friends with and care about. Yet at the same time, I had to temper my own sympathy. While I have no reason to believe that anything Hendrix said was an outright lie, I also couldn't fully trust her. This is something she was fully aware of, by the way. When I asked her about the reason people would push back so hard, she saw exactly what I meant. Hendrix is a conflicted person, but I don't think stupid by any stretch.
There's a lot of things happening offline, in the offline space, like a lot of the, all this bled into my real life. And as somebody that's very well known in Michigan within the queer community, this is not a great situation for me. So I'm getting a lot of pressure. attacking, coming after my law license now, coming after everything I'm on, and I'm pissed off. So, maybe the way I'm reacting is showing that.
And people coming after your law license. Do you want to talk some more about that?
Yeah, I do. With my law license, a group of trans women are saying they're going to come after me for being unethical and this and that, for my alleged transphobia. This is what I have to say to that. The rules of ethics are applicable to me engaging in the practice of law. So I'm on Twitter and I can just tell you I'm not practicing law, giving legal advice, any of that. So, and they're claiming that I have a duty to the entirety of the transgender community. I'm going to tell you they're going to lose on that because I already experienced this with sexual orientation with another attorney once under the same exact rule, and they wouldn't grieve him for free speech. So they're going to run into that.
On this subject, I am certainly not a lawyer, but from a cursory search, it seems as though the role of social media in lawyer practices is something of a contentious debate. This 2012 paper, hosted on Toro Law Center, clarifies how, even if the lawyer isn't discussing specifics of a case, public statements can still inadvertently call into question and create questions of conflicting interests for parties involved in a trial. Though, outside of speculative examples like this, I haven't been able to find any concrete guidelines governing lawyers' social media ethics.
If you want to come after my law, if I have to go through that fight, it's just gonna, what I'm trying to explain to people is like every step you take towards my life just radicalizes me further and makes me more mad until the dust settles, right? Until everybody kind of stops and I can just think. But if you're just pressing me and pressing me and pressing me, it becomes a fiery war, and I will defend my law license with everything I've got, as you would expect, right? Um, so there's that. And then doxing, well, I was doxed last year by TERFs, so they're not much better in that capacity either. They've done their fair share of doxing and harassing. In terms of doxing, I got my, I'm sure, is there anything on Grindr on your list? Because that's probably what everyone wants to know about, which is what was doxed my Grindr profile onto Twitter. A young trans woman, I think she's 24, messaged me when I was on the app calling me a fucking TERF and then screenshotted the shit out of my profile and well, it went wild all over the internet. So stuff like that is getting, any trans friend I had, my last trans friend I had, Frida Wallace. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, she shared some private DMs of mine, stabbing me in the back, and then I get you don't like what I'm saying, but like all these private DMs of mine are being leaked, and Grindr's being leaked, and this is being my whole private life's being leaked. Uh, but I was already doxxed, like name and address wise last year by TERF, so that's nobody can really do more of that to me.
But even as she justified her actions, the things she was saying, she acknowledged how vicious it was. Her answers felt tinged with regret, contrary to the more brazen, even proud things she would say on her public profile that aligned more with TERF rhetoric. I guess the thing that I find questionable, personally, is the vitriol with which you're going about this. Like there is this very, like I was kind of mentioning earlier, this kind of nuclear option where you are almost going out of your way to be like, I guess, kind of cruel, where you're, misgendering, calling out Stacey K right now. And I'm curious, some of these people you are quote tweeting, and so I'm assuming there was a back and forth there, where somebody said something about you, so this is you firing back. What's your bandwidth for continuing to engage with these subjects when it seems like, from what you've talked about, it hasn't made you happier? It doesn't seem like, and this isn't just me saying like, oh, look at this person complaining online, they must not be happy. But from what we've talked about, it seems like this online presence and this type of interaction doesn't make you happy to do, doesn't make you happy to engage with, in that way. And to me, it seems like a lot of the stuff you're saying comes from a place of frustration, and retaliation. But I'm wondering, at what point do you think it benefits any of the causes that you want to push forward, or is it all just for spite? Is it all just out of reacting to the things happening around you?
I think a lot of it is straight up anger, and reactionary, and being more reactionary than I am normally. And I also say I'm more bombastic online than I am in person, like face to face or in person. A lot of people will tell you that. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of anger. I'm pissed off. Uh, there's no doubt about it. I'm pissed off at, I misgendered somebody once and we went nuclear on me, and then it's at to what end though? You're right. Like the back and forth between me and this community can't go on. It's unsustainable, right? You can't live off of anger. So no, I recognize that I am spewing some vitriol, and a lot of it could be considered or is considered transphobic. I'm not going to hide from that.
I sensed a constant hesitancy from Hendrix when I'd point out examples of how detrans and gender crits often approach their pet issues. For example, in how they treated male and female detransitioners differently, and she didn't even push back on that idea. Then there were a lot of the kind of regular TERF gender critical accounts that, much like what we kind of talked about a couple months ago, where you felt kind of, if I'm remembering correctly, kind of love bombed by your first experiences with a lot of them, where they were very open and they were very inviting and reaffirming. And that's still kind of what I'm seeing here. Like it seems, the word cult like is a little too heavy, but it is this kind of reaffirming of a biases. It seems like a lot of these people are still around you, reaffirming these things. I don't Obviously I don't know if they're in any discords, if you're having these private conversations, but I'm wondering, how are you feeling about that space? Kind of, you know, going into it earlier this year, being welcomed in, popping back out of it, going through the whole kerfuffle with the psyop and everything, and then it seems like you kind of got pushed back here, or felt like you were pushed back here because they were kind of the only ones that would, take you back.
Look, before the psyop, I was actually writing quite a few posts about turfs, about like kind of rejecting being called a turf. Um, the thing is I guess I can separate trans ideology, the term, from trans people, right? And I know some people will be like, there's no trans ideology, but for this conversation, I'm saying like that's what I don't like because of the whole queer theory and all that. I left one groupthink situation with activism, so much so for so many years that I'm not exactly loving the idea of just jumping, even though it looks that way, to another set of groupthink. Because any group has their set of ideals, groupthink, and stuff like that. And I don't love the idea. I feel like a lone wolf, more than I feel like I need to join TERFs, or I need to join this. Or I don't really feel I need to join anything, but I can see how that looks like I'm flip-flopping.
Well, and
But it
because
really was
it,
just, yeah.
oh, sorry, continue.
I was gonna say it was just a really horrible suicidal episode is what happened. Uh, and then what a way to go out, I guess. But um, like I said, now I have to live with the consequences of that, of everybody not trusting me. A lot of it, like people have to understand, if you spend 29 years doing activism, and you're kicked off things, and your whole life kind of like collapses in on itself, like that's gonna make anybody at this age, like you work hard for something, and at 43 to have it collapse in on itself is hard. So that's kind of what led to that ideation. And then it did bother me to be called a transphobe and a TERF for many months. Now it doesn't. That scared me. I didn't want to get to a point of being desensitized, being called that, but that's where I've gotten. And I was afraid of that, if that makes any sense.
Well, and I guess it kind of, it has seemed like, again, just from the outside, that it is now something that you not wear, because at the beginning you kind of said like you don't really like the TERFs and stuff, but so much of what I'm seeing and so much of what I'm and okay, so this is a harsh example, but it's one of those things where it feels like to me, and in layman's terms, just broadly, it feels like a distinction without a difference. And the example I would give of that is there are a lot of alt-right and like very far-right radical groups that on paper they advocate for all the shit the Nazis would. In effect, they are spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. They are white nationalists. They are spreading the same blood and soil rhetoric. But then when you go and say, "Oh, you're a Nazi," they go, "Well, technically, I'm not a Nazi." And granted, like I said, very harsh example. I'm not calling you Nazi, but what I'm saying is that it's one of those things where it's like, okay, but if you are 90% aligned with TERFs, gender criticals, whatever, to most people, that last 10% isn't going to be enough to make them go like, well, yeah, but they're not, they don't follow all of that, you know? And
Yeah,
so
of
I
course.
think that's where a lot of people are reacting to so harshly.
No, I think that's fair. I can see why. I mean, I was on the trans side. I do understand the reaction. I get it. I get why it's intense and harsh. Um, Definitely wasn't on my 2025 bingo card when I started. I think my first post of the year, I talked about how I'm going to spend it fighting transphobia. So that is ironic.
The way trans men and trans women are treated in detrans spaces is so wildly different.
Yes, it is.
Um, and I'm sure this is something you've seen where the things that get prioritized about their transition stories, about whatever they talk about, are usually with trans men who detransition back to being women or representing as women. They're often depicted as like this kind of lost innocence. It is this. Uh, I have always found it to be incredibly infantilizing. I have always found it to be like, it is the way that people will talk about it. Again, even talking about 30-year-old people who, would go through surgery, who were aware of what hormones would do, and they'll be lumped in with, oh, it just basically like now they aren't able to have children and stuff. It's like, well, there's the thing I think that bothers me is that it takes away the agency from somebody's own decision making. Like it is treating them as just kind of a dum-dum, just a sheep who is, unwittingly lured into this. And then on the other side of things, and this is where a lot of the things I see perpetuated, is that detrans women are often like there is such less, for lack of a better word, pity. It seems like that narrative that, oh, trans women are just, deviant, autogynephile, sex pest perverts. It sucks it sucks for trans men and it sucks for trans women. And it's yeah,
Well,
it's
I think
something
male detransitioners get the short end of the stick.
definitely.
Um, because and my friend Ari would has pointed this out to me many times. There's the red carpet is rolled out for female detransitioners, and they are treated as you're saying, more like a victim or and I'm a little too old to be treated that. I'm not 21, so but I do see what you're saying. But these male detransitioners are kind of like by themselves, like they don't have the same support network, and they're just kind of like seeing it. And then TERFs will treat them like naughty AGPs and just not include them the same way.
Mhm.
And I think that's wrong. I'll just make that clear. I think that um, if you're detransitioner should have a place to land, male or female. So that's a criticism of TERFs that I would make openly. Uh, dismissing the male detrans side isn't helping you.
During our chat, something occurred to me. I kept going back to her timeline and seeing the often cruel call out posts put up in the few days previous. I pulled up an example of Hendrix's rude comments towards Brianna Wu and asked about them. On November 6th, so a couple days ago, you called out Brianna Wu by her birth name.
I did.
And I'm curious about as somebody who's been in trans circles for a long time, and like that is you. When I say that, it is not like condescending. It is just confirming that you do have a understanding of what birth names and what dead names mean and
I
are.
do.
And I'm wondering why you would call out somebody. And again, this is not defending Brianna Wu, somebody who a lot of people don't like for a variety of reasons, myself included. But why? I see a lot of times you kind of going for a nuclear option,
Hmm.
as far as interacting with people. And I'm curious why you've been jumping there.
In terms of Brianna Wu, the thing that made me mad was that she made that post saying I attacked her. I never attacked Brianna Wu. She just blocked me, um, and moved on. I moved on from it, right? So I didn't appreciate the lie. And then, as Brianna Wu does, attacked me and said, I have a failed life. And you've read the post. Um, well, Brianna Wu has a history of attacking other female detransitioners, and I've watched her do it to 20-year-olds over and over and over again and just be awful to these young girls. I mean, she might not like what they're saying, but it's just so that's kind of where that came from. Just like it wasn't just me, it was like being pissed off on behalf of everybody.
If I had to guess, Brianna was going off of this post by Ari, Hendrix's friend, which Hendrix retweeted on November 2nd. The post, which Hendrix later reacted to, wasn't until November 6th. But as far as I could tell, this was the origin of this particular little spat. And in that moment, I wondered how many people on social media are just like this. As we kept talking, I found myself circling back to that point that Hendrix had talked to me personally previously about taking a mental health break from social media, and that was right before coming back to Twitter to post that it had all been an op. Taking time away and like reflecting, how did that go? Did
Not
you
so
end up
well.
did you end up taking that time?
Not as I wanted to. Um, life has a way of not allowing you to take a break sometimes, and that's kind of where I'm at. Eventually I'm kind of like not take well, I'm still posting, but I'm not doing any activist work. I'm not like out there doing anything. I'm just running my mouth. Um, but so like I'm taking a break from any activism, that's for sure.
But even as we talked and conversation veered into other people in the D-Trans space, I had to admit that in some ways I wasn't so different. I had thrown shitty insults at people like Maya Poet. I will admit it, I relish in insulting Maya Poet. And very much in a similar, I think it comes from a similar place of frustration where if I have just a pithy insult, I can throw it out there immediately to the void. And I feel justified in that. And again, it doesn't make it right, but in the moment, I feel justified in that because of the way that Maya will go out of her way to target other people and do all that stuff. So again, you see, even nobody is exempt from the snake eating its tail. I'm not apologizing for that, by the way. That's a funny tweet. But as we talked, it began to feel like looking into a cracked mirror, someone completely different from me. But we both had an understanding of the venom that drives social media interaction, and we were both taking part. And I wondered, if we didn't, would it change anything?
Well, I don't know exactly where this ends up. That's the thing. Like there's it's kind of like a dark tunnel with no light at this point. I started to feel like there was some light and maybe some letting up, and then the whole law license thing happened, and that I mean, I'll just admit it, it makes me explode with anger. Because once you're subjected to an investigation, it's the process that's the punishment, not the punishment itself of having to hire attorneys and spend thousands of dollars and defend my law license and then possibly sue on First Amendment grounds and do this and that. Um, now I don't like excuses for behavior though. I'm not saying like I don't have somebody's forcing me to type those things because I could be the bigger person. I could walk away. I can only control my own behavior. But I mean, it's kind of like at the same time, I don't like the idea of being silenced. And so those two things kind of conflict with each other.
Say you deactivated your account, or you just like straight up locked it, didn't touch it, and you took the sabbatical that we were kind of talking about last time, like whether that's 3 months, 6 months, and you just found out, what you as a person wanted with your representation, with who you are, with your relationships, your sexuality, all that stuff, removed from any influence on the internet. And then that means, gender criticals, that means TERFs, that means trans people, that means advocates, any of that shit.
Mm-hmm.
If you were just in a void to work out your own shit, where do you think you would come down on all this stuff if you didn't feel those influences working on you?
I would end up moving to the mountains and becoming a hermit. And just not engaging with any of those topics anymore. It's so toxic. Um, I will admit that the debate is extremely toxic. Um, where would I end up? I can't. It's a hard hypothetical to answer. I could end up in the same place. But is there a possibility within that hypothetical I don't? I end up in a more warm place about the whole thing? Sure. I mean, anything could happen once you start removing all these triggers and kind of knives coming at you and credit and like thousands of voices. That's how my therapist always describes it. Like you have thousands of voices going at you at once.
And so I'm obviously there's doctor patient privilege, but I am curious, like, what does you are in a you're in a situation I imagine a therapist doesn't hear about a lot. And so I'm kind of curious, like, you've probably heard very similar advice as far as, trying to stay off the internet, trying not to react, trying not to let that take over your emotional state. The fact that there are people out there who dislike you, disagree with you, will spew that at you venomously. And kind of how has that helped you, or are those things that you are still trying to find a balance with? The
I'm
things
still
that
trying to
you're
find, yeah, I'm definitely still trying to find a balance within that. Uh, it's, I just hope that both sides, me and the other side or whatever side, look, I guess let me backtrack for a second. When I used to get shit from TERFs, transphobes, when I was on the TRA side, arguing for years in the gender wars, I didn't give a
Mhm.
shit what. Like, it didn't hurt me. Like, of course, some transphobia hurt me. Like, yeah, but it didn't, like, I didn't take it as personally as I take some of this because these are people that I called friends or broke bread with or were in the trenches with. So, I do take it somewhat differently and react probably more angrily than I did towards TERFs. So I just want to make that clear. A lot of it is it feels personal, and it probably feels personal to them. I can acknowledge that.
The night after our interview, Hendrix took to Twitter Spaces to tell all and talk about her journey. The way she phrased it in posts before the conversation, it would be the story of starting to see the cracks in gender ideology, seeing the truth behind AGP, and awakening to some sort of new reality, seeing the world for how it really is, etc., etc. I listened in out of sheer curiosity. And everything before this point in the video, I had written before that Twitter space. I prefaced the next section that way because seeing Hendrix operate, surrounded by gender criticals and TERFs, and additionally illuminating bits of her story, confirmed to me nearly everything I had been speculating on. Ostensibly, this space was for Hendrix to talk about her peaking and walk through step by step how she had come to realize the truth about autogynephilia. And this started, according to Hendrix and another D-trans person in the space, Ari, last year.
But, let's wait to get some people in here and then discuss how I got peaked from the time I made that tweet last year and canceled bottom surgery to the time of now.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, because there's just a lot of,
But now, is this just going to be a space where you blame me for grooming you into being self-aware?
No, actually. Actually, I was really hoping Frisha could make it because she gets a lot of credit.
Okay, good. Yeah, blame Prisha. Prisha groomed you. I didn't.
Yeah, well, Prisha started on me last year. So, it actually,
Are we
like,
going to talk about how I groomed you into like being kind to yourself and like perhaps like, you know, better self-care maybe?
yes,
Like,
No.
is that a topic?
well, it started with a kind of 1-2 punch last fall, which is the scheduling of bottom surgery for January, like phase 1 of phalloplasty. And it was set for January 7th. And also, Prisha, who's not here, but who I interacted with a ton on Twitter, like publicly, but we also started talking privately in DMs and then in text, so on and so forth. But that's will come a little later. But her story, like I really, even in arguing with her, like started to soften up a lot. You can even, like, if you were to, I wish I could like collect our entire public history and you could see it, because at first I thought she was like this evil detransitioner, right? I actually thought the detransitioners were also evil and out to like take away trans rights at the time. Well, not evil, but
I'll talk more about Ari in a minute, but one thing I noticed throughout the space was this reinforcement of the idea that trans people and trans ideology was some kind of cult. Hendrix, judging by her Twitter posts, has internalized this attitude. But if you listen to the things people are saying in this space, well, I'll just show you.
That was probably the first thing for me, to be perfectly honest. Like, I'm a contrarian, just naturally. So anybody who's like, oh, this is not something you should be thinking, I'm immediately like, well, I'm going to think that harder then, right? Like, I can't, even when that's not great for me, I can't really help myself. I'm just made that way. And that was like, yeah, that instinct to just be like, yeah, no, I can think for myself, thanks, fuck you very much. Like, that's carried me through a long way.
yeah, very much the same here on that end. Like, and this whole thought police and groupthink, we can get into that in the weeds on that in a little bit, but like, I'll say that being an activist for as long as I was, like, that kind of groupthink and thought police, and it changed over the years, but it became more left and more left and more left.
Yeah, you didn't believe AGP at first.
Yeah, because I was told by that trans community since I, forever, like, that's, negative. Even when I learned about it, like, I didn't really learn about what it was, but I couldn't like argue with you about it because I had more questions than I did answers, right?
So in part, talking to Bren and listening to her talk about why she wanted to be trans piqued you. Being in that group filled with the young AGP friends of mine piqued you. Watching Sarabella rage and crash out and spiral about everything that we said piqued you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
While calling others a cult, the space was filled with nonstop references to seeing the truth about AGP, knowing obscure knowledge, having done the research, painting an outgroup as evil and deceitful, and most interestingly, as an echo chamber. You see this attitude all the time in radical online spaces, this echo chamber paradox where people will claim an outgroup is an echo chamber, and it's because all of their understanding of that group comes from within their own echo chamber. Conservatives think libs are in a world of fanciful illusion because their whole context for anyone to the left is fed to them by conservative sources and social media like OAN or libs of TikTok. They think any Democrat voter is simultaneously a radical commie Marxist and somebody featured in a libs of TikTok video. Likewise, gender criticals and TERFs will assert that trans rights activists are all a groupthink mass of uniformity because all of their context for the way any trans person thinks comes from within their own communities and the things passed around within them. Add to that the enforcement of a specific orthodoxy to see the light of truth, AGP, which of course is backed up by doing your own research, and you can basically play Mad Libs with this space and nearly any fringe belief or conspiracy theory. I'll show you.
She did deep dives. I must have read that blog for hours and hours and hours, right? And all of a sudden, then you find other writers, and then you start realizing oh my God, like these men are autogynephiles, and then you see exactly what the hell has been going on.
You can take these words, cut them out, and replace them with any others in Alex Jones's word cloud. See how little the logic changes when you're talking about lizard people, or Holocaust denial, or time cube. Now, while Hendrix apparently led the space, it was quickly taken over by Ari, who I found was little more than a transgressive edgelord. In the 3 hours I listened, Ari was never anything but consistently unpleasant as a person, and his attitudes and rampant use of slurs felt like such a stark shift from my interview with Hendrix a few days before, where she had been considerate enough to even ask my pronouns.
Turned knowing about autogynephiles, and like the fact that they say it doesn't exist, like that it's been disproven, is so utterly false and ridiculous that like I don't even know how to respond to that, because it's so apparent to me and to like a lot of us in the room.
You know, the best way to respond to it is be like, oh, so you've read Charles Moser, and then I can send you basically a 5-minute spiel that completely destroys Charles Moser, and half the time they don't even know that the person who tried to disprove it is Charles Moser, so then they're going to Google to try to catch up to what you're saying, but they're like literally just like repeating so are like talking heads that just say the same thing repeatedly. And they never double check their information. They just like repeat the thing that the last person said to them about it in response to you. So when you know like what the debunk is on AGP and its flaws and you throw that in their face, they just start sputtering.
Ari is a detransitioner, and his story revolves around being groomed as a young man by a much older man into getting gender reassignment surgery. And I don't doubt that Ari has trauma, but as I listened, I realized I knew exactly what kind of person Ari was. We've all known an Ari, someone who plays at being well-informed, has an answer and factoid for every occasion, so people will see them as knowledgeable. But when you push back, they backpedal, they get defensive. They need to be in control of a situation to feel comfortable and generally seem pretty insecure otherwise. At one point, Hendrix literally deferred to Ari for sources which Ari rhythmically listed out.
But you've read books, right? You've read books and materials that have led you to your conclusions, like Magnus Hirschfeld, for example. Like, can you name some of the authors that you've read in full?
Wait, what do you want me to do?
Your milk. Like some of the authors you've read on this topic on transgender.
Well, I've read Havelock Ellis, Magnus Hirschfeld, John Money, Richard Green, Robert Stoller, and I mean, obviously, I've read Blanchard and Bailey and Kevin Hsu and Anne Lawrence as well.
So you would say you're well educated on the topic.
The problem is that these recitations of titles don't have any real depth. They're made to convince people who want to be convinced that, well, someone wrote a paper, so that must mean the science is obviously settled and good and worth listening to. And obviously, if someone has so much reading and knowledge on their side, they must know what they're saying. Now, 10 minutes into the space, they talk about how both Prisha and Ari were responsible for grooming, jokingly, Hendrix. And part of this peaking for Hendrix was having people like Ari also come into her Twitter spaces and make trans people uncomfortable on purpose.
Openly told you that I made it my mission to show you that AGP was real. And this is something I told you up front. I want you to know that AGP is real. Like, I invited you into that chat with my friends. Do you remember, Morgan? I invited you into that chat, and Morgan and some of my TERFy friends started coming into your spaces and arguing about trans issues. Do you remember that?
I think, yes, I do.
So, like, what were you thinking when all that was happening? When, like, Morgan was coming in, there's this Jewish woman in your space asking these men to stay out of her spaces. They were screaming at her. Sarabella was abusing her. How did that, impact you?
That started to make me feel, well, okay, when I started to learn that AGP, because this was simultaneously with learning that AGP was real, right?
Mm-hmm.
I started to see the AGP rage.
This topic came up a few times, so it sure does seem like not only did these people take back channels to whisper into Hendrix's ear, but then when they would come into her Twitter spaces and receive pushback, that was the perfect confirmation they needed to show Hendrix just how wild and unhinged these trans radicals are. even though this is how Ari just regularly talks to people. So yeah, I'm not surprised people pushed back. And this was how the conversation went, uninhibited for about an hour.
But
It's
yeah,
Charles Moser. He's like a
okay.
BDSM fetishist who studies like kinks and stuff, and he tried to debunk AGP by saying that women have AGP because women are aroused by the thought of themselves like engaging in sexual acts with other
Oh,
people.
that's that person?
Which means that
Oh.
because he basically said that all women have AGP because they're aroused at the thought of themselves as women, but that's not disordered thinking because they are women. So of course, like, all framework for sex is going to flow through the lens of themselves as they are, which is as women. So, like, Moser is insane.
It's so true that it's like a men's sexual fetish rights movement. Like that's what it is. And so yeah, that would be good to know about.
And you see, that's the ideological killing blow. They all stand back and watch somebody who's read a dozen journals and papers because someone wasn't aware there was homework for a debate when they present this like a space for just open conversation. But now the gender criticals feel like they've won. And what's more, this sleight of hand only serves to keep reinforcing to people watching and people like Hendrix that they have entered into the realm of truth and honesty. Except, see, I can do it too. Ari is talking about Ray Blanchard, the guy who came up with autogynephilia as a theory, and even calls himself a Blanchardian at one point. Now, if you look up some criticisms of Blanchard, an article like this might pop up by Charles Moser, someone who Ari offhandedly dismisses wholesale as a BDSM fetishist. So, you have Ari giving the audience the basis of what to believe and what sources to go to, and sprinkling throughout which sources can't be trusted. Not for, like, valid scientific reasons, but just because they're degenerate. Interesting arbitrary signaling, but we will come back to that. And that kind of abstract language is significant because in this article, it's one of the main criticisms of Blanchard's work, where he will use words like fetish and paraphilia without any psychiatric basis, simply asserting things to be self-evident. Moser also talks about how Blanchard will then use these assertions in fringe cases to make broad, sweeping categorizations that don't help a nuanced issue. Now, if there's so many holes in Blanchard's work, which seems to be the bedrock of Ari's gender-critical outlook, you'd expect there to be more people pushing back. Oh wait, there are. There are seemingly no shortage of articles, papers, publications picking apart and debunking Blanchard's work, and those who base their work on his, often criticizing it for using bad samples and drawing conclusions that aren't supported by data. Which isn't how science or evidence works, unless you don't care about truth, just your convenient version of it. And I want to additionally say this doesn't mean that Blanchard should be kept entirely out of these conversations, because gender and sexuality and our understanding of it are constantly evolving and shifting fields of study, which is to say there's no consensus, and that's okay. Fields like psychiatry and psychology are made of theories and frameworks that are supposed to be innovated on and improved over time. Because these are not settled sciences, and especially as we all experience social and population changes, there's no reason to be pathologizing every behavior through frameworks from 40 or 50 years ago, like Blanchard. But Ari won't talk about the holes in his citations, yet will go on about how being trans and trans ideology is inherently homophobic because the sexologists and psychologists who began studying the field seriously over 100 years ago might not have been the best researchers.
Like, you might consider us hateful, but from our perspective, I mean, I would consider trans to be foundationally homophobic and sexist and an evil ideology that's castrating and sterilizing children. So, like, it's not really hateful from my perspective. It's more like a righteous resistance against a great evil.
I would say it's a stretch to call people homophobic for that. And
What do you mean? The idea transition is literally, see, you don't understand what gender identity is or what gender is, and so you probably don't understand that the concept of gender identity was literally created by a pedophile, and that transition itself was created as a cure for extreme homosexuality, which at the time was called pure sexual inversion. So, like, you can't really say it's not homophobic. It was invented for homophobic purposes.
It will shock you to know that this is not what sexual inversion is. Ari has this completely wrong, either that or he's purposely misrepresenting it. In the late 1800s, Havelock Ellis did a paper published called Sexual Inversion, which was the first major medical textbook on the subject of homosexuality. Using the resources and psychiatry and psychology of the time, Havelock asserted that not only was homosexual not a moral failing or some kind of degradation, but could be completely normal. The flaw in this thinking, which shocking I know for something over 100 years old, was the title of sexual inversion, which references a inversion of the sexual desire. While trans people are slightly mentioned in much less flattering terms of the day, much of the book actually seems to come down to the idea that sex and sexuality is based on so many different things that we can't just easily classify them. I particularly like this passage saying even this elementary classification, referring to heterosexuality, bisexuality, and homosexuality, is of no great practical use. Continuing on to say that while therefore the division into heterosexual, bisexual, and homosexual is a useful superficial division, it is scarcely a scientific classification. While Ari might want to represent the idea of sexual inversion as being some kind of way to pathologize trans people taking over queer spaces 100 years ago, the fact of the matter is that while yes, it is an outdated stereotype that uses a lot of faulty science, we've innovated on that over time, and the actual original point of the work was to help push forward a study of human sexuality, including homosexuality. I'm not going to relitigate John Money or Magnus Hirschfeld for the 1000th time. Jesse Gender has some great videos discussing their significance and their failings and puts a lot of it into context in videos like the one she did on Matt Walsh. By the by, if it seems like I've forgotten about Hendrix at this point, yes, I did. Because Ari was literally taking over the stream, speaking over and sometimes even for her.
And I'm just wondering, since you had been on the receiving end of that, and would understand that like insulting people doesn't really do much to convince them, I'm just kind of confused like what the end goal is of that.
Well, typically, I'm responding to somebody when I'm insulting them, typically. I can't say that with 100% certainty, that I've never, outright just insulted somebody. But, yeah, I do react. And knowing on the other end, yeah, I know what some of the good insults are because I've been on the other end of things. It's just, you know what, if I click on that, I'm going to be out of this app. But, no, I mean, if people think I'm transphobic at this point...
Do you expect her to behave like a saint?
Yes.
Do you expect her to have 100% pure intentions in every interaction with to be sitting there trying to bridge and open up their eyes in this selfless way with no care for how they're going to treat her or stab her in the back? Because look, not everybody's here to do that. And Hendrix is going to find her own way of dealing with the cult. But trans people are not kind. They're sadistic and cruel. That's exactly what they are. They're just as cruel as any TERF, generally more cruel.
I don't know Ari well, but I know enough to say that he is someone desperate for validation and uses what attention he gets to be cruel to others. He weaponizes whatever trauma he might have, but chalks it up to just being real or honest or caring. He doesn't want to be censored. Again, we've all known this kind of person who thinks being a rude jackass is some kind of social gift to everybody around him and not just being abrasive and off-putting. One of the more interesting things I came across when digging into Hendrix and her past was this post she made while still trying to keep up the ruse that she had been undercover in TERF spaces. While angling to try and regain some favor with the trans community, she threw Ari absolutely under the bus in a scathing and not entirely inaccurate assessment, saying Ari abuses and drags trans people all day because they have no sense of inner self. They are devoid of emotion and a true sociopath. Other choice quotes include her entire goal is to bully people. She thinks she's very big and bad, but she's just a sad, pathetic sociopath with no inner core. And all she does is weaponize her trauma. Interestingly, I found this post after I wrote this entire essay. This is being added as one of the last things in the video, and yet it still lines up entirely with my brief assessment of Ari. The reality is he wouldn't say this shit in person, or at least have this attitude, and I know that because I've watched interviews from where he did detrans rounds in those circles talking about his experiences, where he is far more cordial.
At some point feeling finally comfortable in your body?
I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable in my body again. I think that the best I'm going to get is finding some way to let go of how I feel about what I've done and be at peace that I did what I could to make sure nobody else does it.
And what would your message be to young people who are struggling with these same issues, or even to parents who are watching who might have a kid who's starting to bring up?
The idea of true trans is a lie.
They talk like this in these spaces because they can't in the real world. In an insular community like Gender Criticals, everyone knows what AGP and who Blanchard is, and that troons deserve to be bashed and should kill themselves.
Hold on, stop for a second. How can you have respectful conversation when you basically just told someone to die?
Well, she's just being ridiculous.
No, I said if they can't handle the word they should 41%.
Anna, be
I can
nice.
say I was for like 17 years and I'm still a crossy. Like, look, can't handle words. Like,
Anna,
don't, like, no,
sorry,
like, if
no,
you can't handle
Anna.
words, what are you even doing breathing oxygen then?
Sorry, she's
Like,
got
are you serious?
Additionally, I see a lot of the same patterns and phrases thrown around by people like Ari that I did when researching literal alt-right hate groups, and emphasis on degeneracy, for example.
I've been working on the internalized homophobia, but unfortunately these so degenerate, it's becoming quite externalized.
In the process of listening, Ari mentioned something about a random person being fat and how if he was that fat, he would kill himself.
Accounts like that.
This is so like, this is just like, wait, I need to hear his voice.
If my waistline ever got that fat, I would kill myself.
I think it was referencing some photo, probably of a trans woman shared in their group chat that they kept referring to, but I don't care. That's unsurprising to me. Just like it's unsurprising how readily Ari admits to hating himself and also other F slurs.
Yeah, I'm a homosexual. Yeah, I'm super fucking homophobic.
So, like, does that mean you hate yourself?
100%.
That still is...
I hate effeminate so much, I couldn't even stand to fucking look at them a year ago. I'm not even kidding. Like, I couldn't stand to look at a non-conforming homosexual. It made my skin crawl. Isn't that
I can't
funny?
say I've ever. That is interesting, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's just internalized homophobia.
And as I listen to these people ramble and insult others and revel in their little slurs and unsupported assertions, it just made me sad. Because these people are sad. Ari is a deeply unwell person. They'd probably admit that. I have no doubt they've dealt with trauma that nobody should be forced to go through, and it cannot have been easy. But you can't tell me someone like this generally cares when out of one side they're saying trans people are homophobic and hateful, and out of the other side they're saying they hate gay people. The only ideological consistency to a space like this online is vitriol and spite. And now Ari is the source for someone else's radicalization, someone else who admitted personally to me their own mental health issues. When I started putting together this video, I didn't think it would have so many similarities I'd seen with a documentary project I did last year on former white nationalists. In that video, I interviewed 5 former white nationalists from different times and places and found nearly identical stories that united them. Feeling pressured by others, feeling rejected by a community, getting radicalized by doing their own research while being fed a steady stream of carefully curated information that reinforced their new worldview, and being preyed upon during their lowest moments. If you don't believe me, go watch that video. Listen to their stories, then listen to Hendrix and this Twitter space, and I think most people will find the similarities unavoidable. And it's not because they're Nazis, but because this is how rationalizing radical thought works, by attacking weak points and taking over through time and reinforcement. I hope that nobody takes my willingness to talk with Hendrix or my apprehensive empathy as evidence. I think she should be forgiven and invited back into trans spaces with open arms. I believe that people should be held accountable for the tangible harm they do, but also that they are still people. In my deep dive videos I've done into people like Matt Walsh or even Brianna Wu, I've often worked by the mandate of trying to understand where someone is coming from and why. And to truly understand that, I think you need to be able to, at least at some level, entertain empathy even for people you might otherwise loathe. And while I am sure many people have such a strong, overriding dislike of Hendrix or even hate her at this point, I can't. In fact, I refuse to put that much emotional weight into the matter. Partially, it's because it's what I think people like Ari and the other gender criticals would want. They thrive on venom and bile like the locust horde. But I am trying not to react in kind. I am trying to not resort to that first response, which is to just lash back and keep the cycle going. Personal attacks are easy. In some cases, when someone exhibits no willingness to learn or even engage or understand, yeah, they can be pretty cathartic. It's not a matter of taking a high road here, though. It's a matter of being discerning about when and how we engage in a way that will actually help a conversation rather than just continue spreading animosity. I am trying to listen, to understand, with the knowledge that the world isn't simple. It's not all good guys versus bad guys, even if sometimes we might wish it was. I hope that Hendrix and people like her, not limited merely to these spaces, but any online community reinforced through this kind of radicalization, will be able to see themselves in this story and have an honest conversation about the role they're playing in that space, and therefore in the cycles of vitriol that they are generating. And even though Hendrix keeps digging this hole deeper, surrounded by a self-affirming ideology of transgressive bile, self-loathing, and repetition, I hope that Hendrix and everyone like her realize they don't have to be this way. They can simply put the phone down and log off. Hello, and thank you very much for watching this latest kind of impromptu deep dive. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've been sitting on this one interview for a couple months and decided, in light of recent events, to finally dig into this whole situation, and I hope this has been a worthwhile look at everything. I really didn't want to get too dragged down or mired in the drama of everything surrounding Hendrix and this whole debacle, so if there was something you felt I overlooked or that was important, please let me know in the comments down below. Additionally, I want to thank everybody who took part in this, including Hendrix, Puck, Cecilia Bedelia, and anybody else who gave me directions to look into things. If you would like to help sponsor more of my work or make sure that more in-depth content like this keeps getting made, independent journalism is hard to come by these days, feel free to donate a couple bucks at the Ko-Fi links down below to help me keep upgrading my equipment so I can keep doing bigger and better stuff, or check out the Patreon links to have your name listed alongside these fine people scrolling across your screen right now. For as low as $3 a month, you can also get Discord access and see looks at things while I'm still working on them, and maybe get notifications before streams go live and all that fun stuff. With that out of the way, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope this video was, at the very least, educational.